The 1980s brought with them technological innovations and an economic boom felt around the globe. In Japan, one such intersection of technology, economy, and creativity was the OVA, or Original Video Animation. And one early example of this format tells the story about a boy, his bike, and the end of the world. Early concepts of what would eventually become Megazone 2-3 were originally proposed to prospective sponsors by Noboru Ishiguro and Toshimichi Suzuki. Tentatively titled Omega City 2-3, the initial proposal depicts a world devastated by nuclear war. The last city standing was, fittingly, called Omega City 2-3. In the far-off decade of the 1990s, Omega City 2-3 is populated with popular music, trendy fashion, and energetic youth who live without ever having experienced wartime. In a sense, this fictional world is not unlike the real world of its creation. Tokyo has been comprised of 23 special wards ever since the end of World War II. And though the recent past of nuclear conflict still looms like a specter in the national memory, the younger generations listening to rock and roll and watching American films like Flashdance and Streets of Fire in the 1980s were more concerned with living their lives in the moment. Omega City 2-3 was supposed to be 26 episodes total, split between two separate television series. Following the conventional business strategy of most anime at the time, sponsors would be enticed by the potential of merchandising toys and models from Mecha in the show. Omega City 2-3 was going to follow in the footsteps of Mospita, with a story formed around the idea of a transforming bike mecha. This arrangement ultimately didn't pan out, and even with a creative name change to Vanity City and story elements like living in a spaceship added, production reached an impasse. With no TV deal in sight, alternative distribution methods were explored. Although there were doubts about whether or not costs could be recouped from the home video market, the OVA format offered new storytelling possibilities in terms of content and creative flexibility for both artists and producers. Called Megazone 2-3 in early promotional material, the O was eventually omitted due to trademark concerns. And just like that, Megazone 2-3 was born. The characters of Megazone 2-3 went through their fair share of changes, both before the original OVA and even after its success. In the proposal, the main character was named Satoru Kiwami, but his biographical information and personality ultimately made him very similar to Shogo Yahagi. Preliminary manuscripts for Vanity City show the counterparts of Shogo and Yui, Ryuzo Yahagi and Risei Tomono. The proposal's leading lady was called Ami, whose personality and background ended up being split into several other characters, like Tomomi and Mai. Tomomi and Mai retained traits from several other would-be characters, including Akio, a brash wannabe filmmaker, and Flat, a gentle soul with ambitions of becoming a composer. Eve started out as the 9 o'clock woman, referred to as such because she was a DJ whose program always began at 9 o'clock. Enigmatic and secretive, she provided information to the main characters and the general populace in subversive ways against the military. The roles of antagonist Jack Orson, the strong-willed police chief, and General Hernando Mos would end up being reworked into BD and his subordinate Yuichiro Shiratori in Part 2. The mechanical star of Megazone 2-3, the Garland, was mentioned in the proposal and referred to as the Galliard when the project was in its Vanity City iteration. At one point, it was colored blue and could move by hovering, before being colored red and officially named the Garland in the final version of Megazone 2-3. In each case, it was some variation of a motorcycle that could also transform into a mecha, to be piloted by the main character. Since a computer simulation did not feature prominently in the original drafts of Omega City 2-3, the Bahamut did not make its appearance until Vanity City, before ultimately being interwoven along with Eve, the Garland, and Shogo in the overall plot of Megazone 2-3. The crew members behind the magic of Megazone 2-3 were as diverse and strong-willed as the on-screen characters that they animated. This resulted in some interesting differences, stylistically, between parts 1, 2, and 3. Even though part 2 is a direct sequel to the original OVA, for fans who had seen part 1, it was understandably jarring for characters like Shogo, Yui, and BD to look so different. The explanations for these changes stem from causes both artistic and commercial in nature. The character designers for Part 1 were Toshihiro Hirano and Haruhiko Mikimoto, the latter of Macross fame, being brought on to design Eve, and to give some much-needed name recognition to the project. In Part 2, however, the character designer was Yasuomi Umetsu. The director of Part 2, Ichiro Itano, implied that his reason for doing so was because Hirano, who had become an accomplished director in his own right, was overqualified to remain as a character designer. Against the wishes of some, Itano brought on Umetsu as character designer and chief animator because he insisted on particular characters and wanted someone who could do drama. For continuity, name recognition, and screen credit, however, Mikimoto was still listed as character designer for Eve, leading to her being the only character to look largely unchanged from Part 1. Director Shinji Aramaki, who had been involved with Megazone 2-3 since the very beginning, brought on Hiroyuki Kitazume as the character designer for Part 3. According to Aramaki, this was in part because he wanted to make something that girls would enjoy. Other elements, like the use of cyberspace and protagonist Eiji Takanaka being a hacker, were also Aramaki's creative decisions, as the cyberpunk genre was becoming more mainstream. Aside from these artistic choices, other decisions were for more pragmatic reasons. According to Aramaki, Part 3 was so distant from its predecessors because several years had passed between their respective releases. Part 1 was released in 1985, Part 2 in 1986, and Part 3 in 1989. Aramaki thought that the stories did not really need to be connected, so that way, if people had forgotten details from prior installments, or were newcomers to the franchise, they could still jump right into the story. Yet for avid fans, Part 3 is, in fact, a kind of continuation of the unforgettable experience that is Megazone 2-3. Megazone 2-3 was an experiment, deviating from television with the OVA format, giving new animators and veterans of the industry the means to express themselves in ways that had never been done before. Even with numerous name changes, stylistic alterations, and many creators vying to present their own unique vision, Megazone 2-3 was a commercial success that changed the anime industry as we know it forever. What started out as a gamble ended up paying off. Before its release, sales of Megazone 2-3 were projected to be around 26,000 units. Those predictions ended up being wrong, however, after more than 100,000 units were sold on VHS. Since then, Megazone 2-3 has been an industry standard for measuring success. Revered today as a cult classic, it pioneered the home video market to better allow for the preservation and exportation of Japanese media, bolstering industry and fueling appreciation of anime around the world.